talk about things that you observed, maybe things you hadn't seen before, something that you thought was important in Exodus 1 through 7:5. Robbie?
I've never seen when God gave Moses the signs, like when he threw the staff on the ground.
You mean when at the burning bush?
Yeah.
Or the things that Moses said, basically wanted something to assure himself that Yahweh was going to be with him, and so he did that. Plus, put his hand inside of his coat, and what happened? He became leprous. Yeah.
When it said that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, if God wouldn't harden his heart, would he have let him go?
That's sort of the implication, that he might have let them go. Although, at the same time, we see that Pharaoh hardened his own heart. So, there's always been a lot of discussion over who was responsible for Pharaoh's heart. And I guess you got to say both, but God hardened it, and Pharaoh hardened his own heart as well. So either way, he wasn't going to let them go. And that's what God intended all along, as we'll see. Right?
I just thought it was cool, like when you mentioned here that woman gave forth like sitting up on a stool. Like it said that in chapter 1, like stool.
Okay, I've forgotten that that was in there. We saw a picture of that in hieroglyphics, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When it said that God kissed Aaron, did he really kiss him?
I don't remember that. It says God kissed Aaron,
Yeah.
or Moses kissed him.
I'm pretty sure it was God who did it.
Anybody else remember that?
No.
See if you can find it. I don't recall that at all.
It was chapter 4:27.
4:27. Oh, it says, the Lord said to Aaron, go into the wilderness to meet Moses. So he went and met him. The he that went is Aaron. The him that he met was Moses at the mountain of God and kissed him. So Aaron kissed Moses. Okay? I know it's, when it just says he and him, you don't always know who it's talking about. But that was a greeting of certainly family, friendship. Okay, anything else that you saw in those chapters?
I have a question. You know how we were talking about like he would enslave them and they could leave? Why didn't they just leave?
Well, they didn't have that choice. The Semites were driven out, or the Hyksos were driven out, and other Semites. There may have been some that were given a choice, but they didn't give a choice to the Israelites, the Hebrews that were there. They said, well, you're going to be a slave. There wasn't anything in Exodus that said they had a choice.
No, I was talking about.
Yeah, from what I said before. Yeah, there were some, because there were a lot of different Semitic groups apparently in Egypt. The Hyksos were the ones in charge, but there were, you can imagine with the Amorites coming in and taking over like that there would have been other peoples that kind of made their way into Egypt too. And so when they were driven out, some of them may have been given a choice. Okay, you leave too, but others they just enslaved. And I think the Hebrews had been there so long and were in a really nice area in the Delta that they decided just to keep them there. I'm not sure what reason they would have had necessarily, but that seems to be the case. Good question. Any others? Any other questions or comments? All right. Today we want to go back to Hatshepsut. And we were about ready to look at her temple last time, I believe. I want to review a little bit about what's going on here. So remember, we have Thutmose the first is Pharaoh. He has a bunch of children, but they all die except Hatshepsut. And she's his favorite anyway. And she is his daughter through his queen. Now, it was unheard of that a woman should become pharaoh. So that's not really looked at as a possibility here. But Thutmose the first has a son through this person who, in some accounts I've read, said she was a common woman, and therefore he could not be pharaoh. Another source I saw says that she was actually Thutmose the first daughter. So he might have had a son through his own daughter, which is really weird. So in order for him to be pharaoh, he had to marry royalty. So he married his half-sister, Hatshepsut, and that gave him the name Thutmose II. He was both physically and mentally deficient, let's say. So Hatshepsut took over a lot of the day-to-day operations of the government because he just really wasn't with it. He didn't go out on a military campaign until his third year.
Doesn't like intermarrying cause like a bunch of like genetic
Yeah.
deficiencies?
Yeah, that could be the reason for this. Although others seem to be untouched, but he definitely was not leadership material, shall we say. So Hatshepsut did a lot of things for him. So he died then, well, let's see, before we get to that, as she is kind of ruling with him, almost like a co-ruler, any of the pictures of them in hieroglyphics together showing them doing things show him first as pharaoh and Hatshepsut walking behind him and looking like a woman. She takes on a title to herself of a queen, definitely a lower place than Pharaoh. By the way, she was 15 and he was 12 when they got married. Let's see. From markings on his mummy, archaeologists believe that Thutmose II had a skin disease and died after ruling only 3 or 4 years. So at that point, his half-sister wife kind of took over. They did not have any children together. She had a daughter through her friend, Thutmose II had a son through a common woman who will become Thutmose III. But he's too young to take over. So Hatshepsut has already been kind of ruling, and then when he dies, she takes over more and more, although her stepson is supposed to be the next pharaoh. Her stepson / nephew, also / son-in-law, because he marries one of her daughters in order to get a connection with the royal blood. Fun stuff, huh? Let's see. So he's too young to take over, so Hatshepsut keeps on doing what she was doing plus more. So he continues to be shown as king for a while, and she is seen with a queen's crown. It's called the Great Royal Wife, and eventually her daughter starts being shown as the queen, the Great Royal Wife, and that was during the second year of his reign, and at the same time, she's still wearing women's clothes and a crown, and begins exercising the rituals of Pharaoh at this point. And she has the title King of Upper and Lower Egypt, and says that it was the god Amen, or Amen, that had chosen her to be crowned. So everything built up until the 7th year of his reign show Hatshepsut as king. Sometimes with feminine titles, sometimes with masculine titles. In the 7th year, she was officially crowned as both king and queen. By the 8th year, she retained only the male title. So she kind of discarded the female title and discarded the female dress and started dressing as a man, even wearing the fake beard to indicate that she was the male ruler of Egypt. She's never shown in female clothes again. But as he starts growing and getting older, her control starts to get a little tenuous. He not only resented his lack of authority, but also harbored ill will toward his stepmother, aunt, mother-in-law, because she had taken over so much power, and also, because of her relationship with Sunday. All right, so Hatshepsut takes a lot of power. She builds this temple out, seemingly in the middle of nowhere, up against a mountain. You can see the mountain all around here, and the temple is built into the side of the mountain. We haven't seen this before, have we? And there's some pictures of it as we go. Let's look at the back, I think. Yeah, it's here. Some think that the reason she chose this location is because this mountain had a name, something about a woman. And if you look at the formation here, you can see a woman squatting. There's her arm. Can you see that?
Yes.
Everybody see it? It's hard for you to see from this angle. It's probably hard for you too. But there's her legs squatting down on her legs. Here's her arm, and here's her head. That's the whole woman there. You see it? Anybody doesn't see it?
I think that's it.
That's it. Well, it's there.
Make my big imagination.
The strong woman in the mountain there, so that's why she built the temple there, possibly. Here's a statue of the falcon, or Horus, at the temple, representing protection. Of course, Pharaoh was considered to be the god Horus. There's a closer view of the opening of the temple with Hatshepsut there in statues holding the shepherd's crook and the whip of the Pharaoh, the Pharaoh's crown, the beard. There's a burial chamber nearby for the chief engineer, Senenmut. Our guide, Midu, said that it was customary for a pharaoh's son to build a temple. If that's the case, then according to our guide, this might have been the same person as Moses. This might have been a burial place designed for Moses. The Hatshepsut built stuff all over the place. She put this column at the Temple of Karnak. Temple of Karnak is a large temple that every pharaoh that came along built onto it. So it had a lot of additions, a lot of different columns like this. This was the one that Hatshepsut put there. It's an amazing thing because it's really tall, and it's just sitting there in the sand. I mean, it looks like there may be a foundation underneath or something, but there's nothing holding it in place, and it's been there for thousands of years, over 3,000 years, and it hasn't fallen over. It's amazing. And even to think, how would you even get that? Because it's all one piece. They didn't put a piece on top of one another. So there are different ideas about how they got it there, but it's an amazing feat of engineering. On the column, you can see this. What is this called?
Little circle thing.
Yeah. What's that called? Cartouche.
Oh.
And then indicates Pharaoh, that is her name. Hatshepsut. Now, thinking about Moses, Moses was a descendant of Abram through Isaac, Jacob, Levi, Kohath, Amram was his father, and then Aaron and Moses are the children. We know that Moses murdered an Egyptian overseer. You read about that. Then he escaped to Midian. where he married Zipporah and then experienced the burning bush. Now, one question might arise concerning Moses and the murdering of this Egyptian overseer and the escape. Where is Moses living at this time? Or with whom is he living? As he's an adult, where is he living?
In the palace?
In the palace, right? He was adopted by Hatshepsut as her son. So he is living in the royal palace. He has been brought up as Egyptian royalty, maybe even in line to be Pharaoh, since he is adopted by Hatshepsut. He's living in the royal palace. Now at this point he's about 40 years old. And he sees an Egyptian mistreating some Hebrew slaves. And so he kills the Egyptian. He thinks it's secret. He hides him, he buries him in the sand. But the next day, he tries to break up an argument between a couple of Hebrews. And they say, what are you going to do, kill us like you did the Egyptian? Now he knows that other people saw what he did. And he takes off. Now, let me ask you this. If he is the son of the person who is the acting Pharaoh, Hatshepsut, living in the royal palace, would he need to run? Wouldn't think so, right? If you're royalty, can you pretty much kill anybody you want? Yeah. So this leads me to believe that Hatshepsut has died. We know that she died somewhere around the time. A lot of scholars put her death after this, but I think it doesn't make sense. And since we don't know for sure, I would contend that her death took place before he murdered the Egyptian and escaped the Midian, especially when you understand how does Thutmose III, the next pharaoh, feel about Hatshepsut? He hates her. So how does he feel about Moses? Probably hates him too. He might even be a rival. He might view him as a rival to the throne. So Moses, knowing that Thutmose III is looking for any reason to get rid of him, knows he can't stick around. So he leaves and goes to Midian. Here is an overview of the life of Moses. He's born in Egypt as a slave, down here in Thebes. I'm sorry, he spends his youth in Thebes, born as a slave up here. And the princess takes him to Thebes, raises him in the palace. He returns to Egypt. Well, we got him in Midian first. Skipped over that. Spent 40 years as a shepherd. Can you imagine being raised in the palace of Pharaoh in Egypt, and then you go and you're a shepherd? That would be a long ways to fall, wouldn't it?
So if he was 40 when he left, and he spent 40 years there, he was 80 when everything else took place?
When he comes back to Egypt, he's 80. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, in the movies, because he looks like a young man, maybe, depending on what movie you watch. I think it's fun. I think it's the movie The Ten Commandments, where Charlton Heston plays Moses. He comes back and he does have a white beard and everything. But the guy playing Pharaoh, Yul Brynner, hasn't changed at all in 40 years. He still looks exactly the same. But anyway, so he's in Midian for 40 years as a shepherd. He has the encounter with the burning bush. Then he returns to Egypt to lead them out of captivity, led them into the wilderness. They spend 40 years in the wilderness. They've got this kind of out of order because he received the law first before the wilderness. Received the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai, and we'll talk later about why this is probably not where that took place. This is called Mount Sinai, but I don't think that's the real Mount Sinai. And then he goes up to Mount Nebo. They go up here. He appoints Joshua as his successor, and he dies on Mount Nebo. Remember, he's allowed to look into the land, but he's not allowed to enter because of his disobedience along the way when he struck the rock instead of speaking to it. All right, so that's an overview of Moses' life. Now let's look back at the family tree here. So Hatshepsut, I think, is dead. Thutmose III has come on the throne. He hates Hatshepsut so much that he erases her name from everything he can find. And I think by that he hates Moses as well. Here's a statue of him. Here's a picture drawing of him as probably how he looked from looking at the statue. He is very ambitious, very energetic as Pharaoh, much different than his father. He conducts 17 military campaigns in 19 years. There's an interesting story about how he captured Joppa by hiding soldiers in 200 baskets that were then brought into the city. It looked like just baskets, kind of like the Trojan horse. And then once they got in there, they came out of the baskets with their swords and captured the city. That may have happened on his first campaign. Thutmose has the first professional army. Before this, when you went to war, you had to gather up all the people that you could, all the men you could, and these guys are not soldiers, but go to war with them. He develops an army that's an army all the time and pays them to be an army. One of his significant successes is against an alliance between different kings in Syria, Palestine, at Megiddo. Megiddo may sound familiar to you, or Armageddon is the Hebrew name for the valley of Megiddo. Megiddo is a place, it's a great place for battle. When you're standing up on the hillside looking down, it is a nice broad plain. About the only place like that in all of Israel. Good place for battle, and they fought one there. This shows how the battle took place and so on, which we won't get into all the details of that. But he was successful. He expanded Egypt's territory. During his reign, priests gained power and wealth, and a new middle class of scribes and petty officials came into existence. He expanded his territory all the way over to the Euphrates River. He had numerous building projects, and he used a large slave labor force. I believe we have his death recorded for us in Exodus 2. If you turn your Bibles to Exodus 2, beginning of Exodus 2, we have the birth of Moses and the discovery of Moses by Hatshepsut. And maybe you have written her name in there. That would be a good thing. Pharaoh's daughter is Hatshepsut. And then we have Moses killing the Egyptian and fleeing to Midian. And then we come down to verse 23. During those many days, the king of Egypt died. I think that is Thutmose III. So if you want to write that in there, you'll be able to take note of that when you read this in the future. Thutmose III is the king of Egypt who died in Exodus 2. And we see that the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery, cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. So at this point, God puts into operation the plan he has for getting the Israelites out of Egypt.
Since it says God remembered, does that mean he forgot?
It's just a way of putting in human terms what's going on. Of course, God knows everything all the time. What that means is now he's going to do something.
Okay.
So in other words, even though he's known about it all the time, people have said, God forgot about us. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that God doesn't know. It just means he hasn't done anything. And now he remembered. Now he's going to act on his relationship. Okay? Good question. Any other questions about Thutmose III? All right, when he dies, his son takes over. He is Amenhotep, or Amenophis II. Notice the name Amen in there. Still carried on in the Egyptian pharaohs. During his reign, there's been discovered a topographical list that lists a couple of people, one called the Shasu, which maybe were relatives of the Israelites. It's a general term used by Egyptians to describe Bedouins east of the Delta. And when Israel was wandering in the desert, later they may have been identified as Shasus. And also we have the name Papiru, which probably are the Hebrews. And this is from late in his reign. The word Hebrew probably came from Papiru. I believe that this Pharaoh is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. So when if you go to chapter 5, when Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh, chapter 5, you could write in there Amenhotep II. Amenhotep II. Now, if you watch programs on television or movies or documentaries about the Exodus, 9 times out of 10 or more, they'll identify the Pharaoh of the Exodus as Ramses II. And that is, that doesn't make any sense at all historically. It's a couple hundred years later, and it all goes back to in Exodus where it talks about the Israelites building the city of Ramses. Well, so people assume, well, it must be Ramses II because he did a lot of building. But what they don't understand is Ramses was a general term used long before Ramses II. In fact, what's been found is that the title Ramses was a title given to rulers in the Delta, the land of Goshen, and the island of Crete. The title was used by those rulers long before the Pharaoh called Ramses the Great came on the scene, and are mentioned in an ancient Egyptian book. So the name Ramses actually may have been used for Jacob and others that were living there as well. All right, so this is the Pharaoh that is there when Moses comes and says, "Let my people go," and the Pharaoh that experiences the 10 plagues that God brings upon Egypt to force him to let the Hebrew people leave Egypt. All right, any questions about who we've talked about today?
So this is about the Egyptians being black. Does that mean Moses is black?
Now Moses was Hebrew,
Oh, okay.
remember?
I was gonna say.
So he would have stood out in Pharaoh's court, right? And unlike the movie Prince of Egypt, I don't know if you saw that or not, they seem to indicate that Moses didn't know he was Hebrew. Well, no, he looks different than Pharaoh's family. There's no doubt about it that he knew who he was. And that's why he defended some Hebrews that were being beat up by the Egyptian overseer. There's a distinct difference in their skin coloring.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right, tomorrow we're going to start looking at the gods of Egypt and then how it relates to the plagues of Egypt. Have you ever done any study on that before? Tomorrow I want you to bring your Chromebooks. We're going to do some research first on the gods of Egypt. Find out what we can about the different gods. So bring a Chromebook with you and we'll do some research tomorrow. Any questions?